So, Jean-Francois, yesterday the big story out of Quebec City was this referendum on immigration idea that all of a sudden Francois Legault started talking about, based on the fact that he wants more from the federal government for Quebec on immigration, despite the fact 2 weeks ago when all the provincial premiers met, Justin Trudeau was asked about that demand and simply said, no, it's not going to happen. Mark Miller basically said the same thing today. So I'm wondering what you think and why the idea of all things, a referendum on immigration would be an idea that he thinks might achieve something.
Well, Mr. Legault, on this question, he is a tease, all right? He's a tease. We have a French word for that. It's agace, means that he always shows some soft willingness to do something, but he will not do it. And the probability that we'll have a referendum on immigration in Quebec is very close to 0%. Very close. Listen, he's in the tough spot because even the content of this would-be referendum is in flux. He was elected twice on campaigning on immigration, and his party plank was to repatriate all powers on immigration. Yesterday, he said, well, maybe the question would be, should we have all the power on temporary workers, which is a far cry from all powers in immigration. And so he said, well, we'll see if Mr. Trudeau, whom he met about 2 weeks ago, and who is going to meet again before the end of June, comes up with some of the measures he's been asking for, then there won't be any need for a referendum. But now his asks are relatively small, so I think his calculation is that Trudeau will give him enough for him to say he won, and so there's no need for a referendum. That's how I see the play here.
Okay, I'm trying to imagine what that enough is. The only thing, and I spoke about this earlier, might be, okay, maybe the feds will give him a couple extra $100 million to deal with this. Is that enough of a win, Jean-Francois?
Well, I think, of course, there's the Quebec says the refugees cost us $1 billion over the last 3 years. You're offering us $100 million. If they split the difference, it will still be far from $1 billion, but that would be a gain. But basically, he's asking for either control over all temporary workers, which was the case, by the way, before 2014, when there was no federal program on temporary workers. 100% of this category was under Quebec control. So he's either asking that, but I don't think that Mark Miller wants to give them that. But he can have the federal government agree to some conditions and some lower number, which is the path on which Miller is already. So he could decide that this is enough to say it's a win.
Okay. Again, I just want to point out that, and you heard the same comments that we've all heard, right, from Mark Miller saying, let me play this for you. It's a short clip. But again, this goes to what Justin Trudeau said when they first met a couple of weeks ago. And he was, I think, more direct then. We might have talked about it at the time. He was more direct then and simply saying no than at any other time, I think, up until then. And then today, when Mark Miller was asked about this idea, right, Francois Legault's referendum on immigration, he said this.
Well, look, any country that gives away its immigration powers to a third party, anyone else, a federated state, is no longer a country.
Seems like a pretty obvious no there. You're not getting anything else, doesn't it?
Well, it's a difference between nothing and everything. Miller is right. If you give everything, then you're no longer a country because everything includes borders, and you can't have a country without borders. And that's the position of Plamondon saying, yes, he's right. If we want to have real control, we need independence. But there's a big leeway, and the agreement on permanent immigration and temporary immigration does exist within Canada because at first Pierre Trudeau and René Lévesque decided to have this partial devolution of powers. So there could be you can move the line of devolution without going to 100%, and Canada would still be a country.
But so you're suggesting you're suggesting we take a step back to, 30, 40 years ago to try to appease Quebec here in this demand, even though the rules have changed since then?
Well, the rules have changed. The rules of separation of power haven't changed until Mr. Trudeau said last week that nobody cares about the distribution of powers. If the two governments decide to share or swap powers on something, they have the ability to do that within a federation. Clearly, it would be very difficult for a province, any province, even a province that's not a nation like Quebec, to have control on security issues, on immigrants, on visa. The visa distribution is very close to sovereignty itself, and of course borders. But if the federal government decided to give back all temporary workers in terms of control and levels to Quebec, that'd be fine, because that was the situation just 10 years ago. He could decide that family reunification is also under the purview of Quebec. That could be done. It's just a political decision to devolve it or not.
Wouldn't it have to then apply to all the other provinces in the country?
No, because this agreement only exists with Quebec. There are a series of things that do only apply to Quebec. We can talk about the retirement features that have created the Caisse de dépôt, the fact that Quebec has its own loan and a program for students, and Quebec is the only place in Canada that the federal government voted that is a nation. So there's some logic there.
Okay. Let me ask this question, because I asked this earlier of our listeners. This ploy, or call it whatever you want, because even, the idea of a referendum on immigration, it's a bit of a hollow thread. It doesn't necessarily mean anything, even if everyone decided it was something they didn't like in Quebec. It's not something you could take to the federal government and say, see, now give us more powers. I don't think anyone thinks that would happen. But I wonder if the idea alone, if you think, Jean-Francois, you bring up a referendum idea on immigration, it's not much of a leap to then suggest that if that goes the way you want it to, maybe a referendum on sovereignty is next, even for the CAQ, who promised there wouldn't be one.
Well, the CAQ's position and Legault's position is that there is no possible majority for independence. That's a core belief of his. So he doesn't want to take the risk of losing this referendum. And I believe it's a core belief. Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon believes that if you work hard enough, you can get to a majority yes. Okay, so this is the difference between the two. Now, the problem with the referendum on immigration is more if you lose it. And then people said, well, I don't understand. We all voted and Ottawa refuses. Then the only option is full sovereignty. That's the more dangerous path for federalists and positive for sovereigntists. And that's why Mr. Legault is hesitant to use the tool. He only wants to tease and not use the tool.
Which is what you started by saying he does. You don't think he could get to the point where if he comes back empty-handed from Ottawa on immigration that he would even consider that? People change, things change. If, on immigration, he doesn't have what he needs even to pretend it's a win, then pressure will come to say, well, then you need a referendum to do that. He can still resist. He can show, listen, recently we had a referendum in Alberta against the equalization payment system. It achieved nothing. If Ottawa says no, it's no. But the difference is that the independence movement in Alberta is only 15%. Here it's 35%. So it's a political play. If you want to use the referendum to get a no, to then get a majority, you can do this in Quebec, but you have to be willing to go all the way. If you're a tease, you're not willing to go all the way. And that's where we'll leave it. I like the references. All right, Jean-Francois, thank you. We'll talk to you again next week.